The sun hung low over the freshly cut grass of the Hawthorne Strikers training ground as Aisha Rahman adjusted her sports hijab, tucking a loose strand of hair back into place. She had spent the last 6 months training for this moment. The tryouts were one of the most elite girls' soccer teams in the state. Moving to a new city had been difficult. But the pitch had always been her sanctuary, the one place where nothing else mattered except the ball at her feet and the net ahead. As she stepped onto the field, she could feel the weight of curious stares, some assessing, some skeptical. The other hopefuls whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward her hijab before darting away. Aisha ignored them, rolling her shoulders back. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to prove she belonged. When the whistle blew, she moved like lightning, dribbling past offenders with ease. Her footwork was sharp, her passes precise. She scored twice in the scrimmage. Her second goal a stunning curving shot that even the backup goalkeeper couldn't reach. The assistant coaches exchanged impressed nods. But when the tryouts ended and the head coach, a stern man in his 50s named Reynolds, called her over, his expression was unreadable. "You've got skill, Rahman," he admitted, crossing his arms. "But that," he gestured vaguely at her hijab, "isn't part of the uniform." Aisha's stomach dropped. She had heard this before, back in her old league, but she had hoped a team of this caliber would be different. "It's a safety hazard," Reynolds continued, his tone final. "League rules." Aisha clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had prepared for this. "With all due respect, Coach," she said, keeping her voice steady, "FIFA approved sport hijabs years ago. There's no safety issue. It's designed for athletes, and the Olympic Committee allows them to." She pulled out her phone, ready to show him the official guidelines, but Reynolds waved her off. "This isn't the Olympics," he said dismissively. "This is Hawthorne. We have standards." The implication hung in the air, standards you don't meet. Aisha's face burned, but she held his gaze. "Then let me prove it doesn't affect my play," she challenged. "Bench me if I'm a liability." For a long moment, Reynolds studied her, his jaw working. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine, one trial game. But if the league complains, you're out?" Aisha nodded, relief and defiance warring inside her. She had won the battle, for now, but as she walked back to the locker room, the whispers followed her. "Why doesn't she just take it off?" one girl muttered. "It's not that hard." Another snorted. "Probably just wants attention." Aisha kept her head high, but the words stung. She had spent her whole life fighting assumptions, that she was too quiet, too foreign, too different to excel at the sport she loved. Now, even here, among athletes who should have understood passion and dedication, she was an outsider. As she changed into her street clothes, a girl with a high ponytail and a scowl, Lena, the team star forward, leaned against the lockers, watching her. "You know," Lena said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "no one's ever gotten special treatment like this before. Must be nice." Aisha met her eyes in the mirror. "Special treatment would be not having to argue for the right to play at all," she replied coolly. Lena's smirk faltered, but before she could retort, a quieter voice cut in. "Leave her alone, Lena." It was Mia, the team's backup goalkeeper, who had been silent until now. She earned her spot same as anyone. Lena rolled her eyes and stalked off, but Mia gave Aisha a small, almost apologetic nod before following. Aisha exhaled, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She had gotten through the tryout. She had stood her ground. But as she stepped out into the fading daylight, she knew the real fight was just beginning. The first official practice with the Hawthorne Strikers felt like walking into a wall of ice. Aisha had hoped her performance at tryouts would silence the doubters, but if anything, the whispers had grown louder. As she laced up her cleats in the locker room, the chatter around her came in sharp bursts, laughter at inside jokes she wasn't part of, conversations that died the moment she approached. Most of the girls avoided looking at her entirely, as if she were a ghost. The only exception was Lena, the team star striker, who made sure Aisha knew exactly how unwelcome she was. "Nice headscarf." Lena sneered during warm-ups, her voice just loud enough for the others to hear. "Does it come in team colors, or are you planning to stick out all season?" Aisha forced a tight smile, dribbling the ball past her without a word. She wouldn't give Lena the satisfaction of a reaction. But the sting lingered, not just from the jab, but from the way the other girls snickered, their loyalty clearly with Lena. The tension wasn't just coming from the team. At the end of practice, Coach Reynolds pulled Aisha aside, his expression grim. "League's breathing down my neck about your situation," he muttered, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. "They're saying if you play with that thing on, we could face fines. Or worse." Aisha's stomach twisted. "It's not a thing," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "It's part of who I am, and it doesn't affect how I play." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I don't care what you wear, but the board's got old school rules, and they're not budging. Unless you," he stopped abruptly, but the unspoken words hung between them. "Unless you take it off." Aisha's jaw tightened. "I'm not removing it," she said flatly. Reynolds studied her for a long moment before sighing again. "Then we got a problem." He walked away, leaving Aisha standing alone on the sideline, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The team's first game arrived with a buzz of anticipation, not just for the match, but for the spectacle of Aisha's debut. The stands were packed, and Aisha could feel dozens of eyes tracking her as she stepped onto the field. She ignored them, focusing instead on the rhythm of her cleats against the turf, the familiar adrenaline coursing through her veins. But in the middle of the first half, as she dribbled past a defender, the opposing player, a tall girl with a sneer, leaned in and hissed, "Terrorist!" The word hit Aisha like a physical blow. For a split second, the world narrowed to that single venomous syllable. Her chest burned, her vision blurring with unshed tears. But then she heard Mia, the team's usually silent goalkeeper, shout from the box, "Aisha ball!" The reminder snapped her back. She blinked hard, shook her head, and surged forward, weaving past a defender who'd insulted her. With a burst of speed, she broke free and fired a shot into the top corner of the net. The crowd erupted. The scoreboard flashed 1-0. As her teammates half-heartedly congratulated her, Lena pointedly ignoring her, Aisha allowed herself a small, fierce smile. She'd answered the insult the only way that mattered, by letting her game speak for her. But the victory was bittersweet. After the match, as the team filed into the locker room, Coach Reynolds pulled her aside again. "Great goal," he said gruffly. "But the league's still not happy. They're saying if you play next week with the hijab, we forfeit the points." Aisha's stomach dropped. "That's not fair," she whispered. Reynolds' expression was almost apologetic. "Life's not fair, kid." Across the room, Lena smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. But then, to Aisha's surprise, Mia spoke up. "That's bull," she said bluntly, her voice cutting through the chatter. The locker room fell silent. Mia, who never said more than 3 words at a time, was glaring at Reynolds. "She just won us the game. Who cares what she's wearing?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Lena rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Mia. Don't be dramatic." But Mia didn't back down. "I'm just saying," she muttered, shooting Aisha a quick glance. If the league's so worried about uniforms, maybe they should focus on the fact that Lena's socks are never the right length. The room erupted in nervous laughter, the tension breaking just enough for Aisha to breathe again. Later, as she packed up her gear, Mia lingered by her locker. "Ignore Lena," she said quietly. "And the league, they'll catch up eventually." Aisha nodded, a flicker of warmth cutting through the cold. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone here after all. The video exploded overnight. Someone in the stands had captured the moment the opposing player hurled a slur at Aisha, her face twisting with venom before Aisha shook it off and scored the winning goal. By morning, the clip had been shared thousands of times. The hashtag let her play trending across social media. The comments were a battlefield, some calling the incident disgusting, others accusing Aisha of playing the victim or forcing her religion into sports. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another debate about inclusion versus tradition. Aisha's phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. She sat at the kitchen table, her cereal turning soggy as her father scrolled to the headlines with a deepening frown. "This is exactly what I worried about," he said, rubbing his temples. Now the whole world is weighing in on your life. What if this affects your chances with college scouts? What if nothing changes unless someone speaks up? Aisha's younger sister, Zara, interrupted, slamming her juice glass down. At 14, Zara had a fire in her that Aisha envied. Did you see the comments from other hijabi athletes? They're saying Aisha's their hero. Their mother sighed, stirring her tea absently. It's not that simple. Habibti, people online forget this is real life. Aisha's the one who has to face those girls every day. Aisha pushed her bowl away, her appetite gone. Her parents weren't wrong. The locker room had been tense enough before the video. Now, it would be a war zone. At practice that afternoon, the divide was instant. A cluster of teammates huddled around Lena, who was ranting about distractions. We're here to win, not be part of some woke experiment. Lena snapped, shooting Aisha a glare. But for the first time, not everyone nodded along. A few girls hesitated, their eyes flicking between Aisha and their phones, where no doubt they'd seen the viral video. Mia stood apart from both groups, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Coach Reynolds blew the whistle with extra force, his usual drills replaced by a terse announcement. League's issuing a statement tomorrow. Until then, focus on soccer. That evening, Aisha's parents sat her down in the living room. Her father handed her a business card, Sports Equality Alliance, with the name attorney Nadia Hassan embossed in bold. They want to help, he said quietly. They think the league's policy violates anti-discrimination laws. Aisha's throat tightened. A lawsuit? That would make everything real. Permanent. No more pretending this was just a misunderstanding. Across from her, Zara bounced on the couch. This is amazing. You could change the rules for everyone. But their mother's smile was strained. Just remember, Beta, no matter what happens. She cupped Aisha's face. You're already our champion. The next day, the league statement was as hollow as Aisha expected. While we respect all cultural backgrounds, uniform standards exist for consistency and safety. We are reviewing the policy in light of recent feedback. Translation, they were stalling. At practice, tensions boiled over. When Aisha walked in, Lena deliberately knocked her bag over, spilling her gear across the floor. Oops, guess you'll have to miss practice while you clean up, unless you want to call your lawyer. The room froze. Aisha crouched to gather her things, her face burning, but before she could respond, Mia stepped forward. Grow up, Lena, she said, dropping to help Aisha. A few other girls hesitated, then joined in, one even handing Aisha her water bottle with a small, apologetic smile. Lena's jaw dropped. You're all seriously. Enough, Coach Reynolds barked, emerging from his office. He looked exhausted. Hassle her again, Lena, and you're benched next game. The locker room fell silent. As Aisha tied her cleats, Mia leaned in. They're scared, she murmured. That's why they're fighting so hard. You're making them question everything. Aisha glanced at the teammates who'd helped her, really looked at them. Maybe some were just avoiding drama. But others, their eyes held something new. Doubt, the kind that came before change. That night, Aisha lay in bed, replaying the day. The fear in her parents' eyes. The fire in Zara's. The shaky solidarity of teammates who might, just might, be starting to see her as more than a problem. She opened her laptop and typed a message to Attorney Hassan. Let's fight. Outside her window, the first stars blinked awake. Tiny points of light against the dark. The email arrived the night before the semifinals. Aisha stared at her phone screen, the league's bolded words searing into her vision. Per uniform policy violation, you will not be permitted to participate in tomorrow's match unless you comply with dress code regulations. Her fingers trembled as she forwarded it to her parents, who erupted into hushed, urgent Arabic in the kitchen. Zara snatched the phone, her eyes widening. They can't do this, she hissed. Not before the biggest game of the season. Aisha sank onto the couch, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down on her chest. Play without her hijab, something she'd never done in her life, or let her team down. The clock ticked toward midnight as her father made furious calls to Attorney Hassan, while her mother paced. muttering about injustice. At dawn, Aisha arrived at the field early, her stomach in knots. The locker room was unnaturally quiet when Mia burst in, still in street clothes, her cheeks flushed. "They're serious," she said, thrusting her phone at Aisha. A team group chat had exploded. Lena celebrating the league's decision, while a handful of others debated protesting. Mia's last message stood out. "If Aisha's benched, I'm not playing either." Aisha's breath caught. "You do that." Mia shrugged, but her eyes were steel. "It's not right." One by one, 3 more teammates arrived, girls who'd barely spoken to Aisha all season, and quietly began changing into warm-up gear. "We talked," said Jess, the usually quiet midfielder. "We're with you." Coach Reynolds found them huddled together outside, their defiance obvious. For a long moment, he studied them, his jaw working. Then he did something Aisha had never seen. He sighed, took off his cap, and rubbed his face like a man making peace with a storm. "God damn it," he muttered. Then, louder, "Huddle up." When the team gathered, he didn't mince words. "League says Aisha sits. Some of you say you walk if she does." Lena scoffed, but Reynolds held up a hand. "I've spent 20 years coaching girls to fight for every inch on this field. Can't very well tell you to stop fighting when it matters." He looked at Aisha. "You play. Lee wants to find me? Let him try." The stadium buzzed with tension as they took the field. News vans lined the parking lot. Someone had tipped off the media. Camera flashes followed Aisha's every move, and the opposing team eyed her with open curiosity. But the real shock came during warm-ups, when the Riverside Wildcats, their rivals, unfurled a banner reading hashtag "Let her play from their bench." Aisha's throat tightened. This wasn't just her fight anymore. The game was brutal. Lena, furious at being upstaged, hogged the ball and ignored Aisha's runs. The Strikers were down 1-0 at halftime when Reynolds finally benched Lena. "Your ego's costing us this game," he snapped. With fresh legs and a reinvigorated lineup, Aisha wove through defenders in the 75th minute, sending a perfect cross to Mia, who headed an equalizer. The crowd roared. In overtime, it was Jess who found Aisha with a looping pass, setting her up for the winning volley. As the net rippled, the stadium erupted in cheers so loud they drowned out the lone voice shouting, "This is a disgrace to the sport." Afterward, the league commissioner himself appeared in the locker room doorway, his tailored suit out of place among the sweat and celebration. "Effective immediately," he announced stiffly, "the board will review the uniform policy after the championship." The room fell silent. "Until then," he continued, eyeing Aisha, "we'll tolerate your current attire." Tolerate. The word hung in the air like a slap. As he left, Mia threw her arm around Aisha's shoulders. "They're scared," she whispered. "They know they're losing." That night, ESPN ran a segment titled, "HIJAB Hero Shifts the Goalposts." Aisha's phone blew up with messages from athletes she admired, even a retweet from a U.S. women's national team star. But as she lay in bed, her medal on the nightstand, one thought kept her awake. The championship was in 2 weeks. The league had only postponed the battle, not surrendered, and their so-called review could still end with a quiet rule change that came too late for her. Zara, sensing her turmoil, crawled under the covers with her. "Whatever happened," she said, "you made them look at you. Really look." Outside, a car sped by, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling like a spotlight searching for something or someone worth seeing. The championship game dawned under a sky heavy with unspoken tension. As Aisha stepped onto the field, the roar of the crowd was a living thing, some chanting her name, others booing when she touched the ball. Camera flashes lit up the stands like lightning, capturing every moment of what had become more than a soccer match. It was a showdown between tradition and progress, and Aisha could feel the weight of it in her bones. Coach Reynolds pulled her aside before kickoff, his voice low. "No matter what happens out there today," he said, gripping her shoulder, "you've already changed this team." The words settled in her chest like armor as she took her position, her sports hijab bright against the Strikers' colors. The game was a battle from the first whistle. The opposing team played aggressively, their tackles just shy of dirty, their eyes constantly flicking to Aisha with a mix of resentment and curiosity. Lena, surprisingly, had become a silent ally after her benching in the semifinals. She kept her head down, passing to Aisha when it mattered. But it was Mia who truly shone, her saves keeping in the game as the score remained deadlocked at 1-1. With 5 minutes left, Aisha found herself with the ball at her feet, the defense closing in. She could have taken the shot herself. The angle was tight, but not impossible. Instead, she spotted Mia sprinting up from the goal, an unmarked streak of determination. Without hesitation, Aisha lofted a perfect cross. Mia connected with a header that sent the ball screaming into the net. The stadium erupted. Teammates swarmed Mia, but it was Aisha she hugged first. Their foreheads pressed together as the crowd's noise faded into a blur. "That was for you," Mia gasped, her voice raw with emotion. The final whistle blew, sealing their victory, not just in the game, but in something far bigger. Reporters rushed the field, microphones thrust toward Aisha's face. "How does it feel to win despite the controversy?" one asked. Aisha wiped sweat from her brow and smiled. "This was never about controversy," she said. "It was always about the right to play." The league's announcement came 3 days later, in a press conference that made national headlines. Effective immediately, the uniform policy would explicitly allow religious attire, including hijabs. The commissioner, his earlier stiffness replaced by careful diplomacy, even praised Aisha's dedication to the sport. It was a victory, but one that tasted bittersweet. Why had it taken so much fighting to get here? The season's end brought unexpected turns. Lena approached Aisha at their final team dinner, her usual bravado replaced by something quieter. "I was wrong," she admitted, staring at her plate. "About a lot of things." Aisha nodded, accepting the olive branch without fanfare. Meanwhile, Mia had become her closest friend, their bond forged in the heat of shared defiance. And then came the letter that changed everything. An invitation to try out for the U-20 national team. No asterisks, no conditions, just a chance to play at the highest level, as herself. As Aisha packed her bags for training camp, Zara bounced on her bed, grinning. "Told you you'd change the game," she said. Aisha laughed, tossing a sock at her. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Colors that for once felt like they belonged to her too. Somewhere, another girl was lacing up her cleats, adjusting her hijab, stepping onto a field where the rules had been rewritten just enough to let her in. Aisha's story wasn't over. It was just beginning.